So as Jack mentioned, and we'll get into a little later, today begins the first of what will be 3 Sundays to help us do what it says up there on the screen. Now I hope there isn't anybody in the room who did not, in some form, either see it on Facebook or get it in their email or get it in their snail mail, didn't see the letters to RiverTree from both me and our church's board called the steering team. And I'm going to assume you guys read those things, so just a few highlights to communicate before we move on to really where we want to spend the bulk of the morning. I communicated with our church's board starting 2 weeks ago now that my wife had gotten wind of and been offered an extraordinary job that was out of state. And the kids and I wanted to give her the gift of taking that job. And what I said to you in my letter to you is actually 100% true, which is if you were 4 times the size, 6 times the size, and if I were still paid full time, I would still make the same choice, because I am making this choice for my wife. And I care about her enough that I want her to be able to pursue this. And she has never found anything like it here, so we gave her the freedom to do that. I think I would tell you that in reflection, this is one of the decisions that was the easiest to make in my life. And if you know anything about me, I don't make easy decisions. I mull things and am slow about things and am very analytical and often full of doubt about decisions that I make. Not this one. And it has to do with the reason why I did it. I would make this decision 10 out of 10 times because it's for my wife, and that's easy. You also got a letter. Oh, no, before I leave this, some of you have asked, so what are you going to do, Pastor Chris? Good question. I don't know. I will tell you what I've told my good friends who have been walking with me for the last month through this discernment process as a family. I would like to use all of my accumulated experience about small church ministry to help other small churches. I don't know if that means I'm going to be a small church pastor where we're moving, but I might be a pretty low-cost consultant for small churches. Maybe that's what I'll do. I honestly don't know. So what you can do is pray for me that I find that God makes it very clear to me how I can invest in the kingdom where we're moving. And I don't know what that is yet, and that's okay. So about a week after I notified our church board about my need to transition away from RiverTree, they had a scheduled meeting that was already on the calendar, to which we invited our district, called our classis in the RCA, where they considered what the impact of my transition would be. What you don't know is that our steering team has been talking pretty openly for several months now about the future of RiverTree and how sustainable it was. For example, there is this nearby church that offered us the chance to move there and to share their building with them. But we did not know on the steering team whether or not RiverTree would survive that move. So we were openly talking about it. And then at this meeting on the 15th, we sought the expert outside counsel of our classes, who have closed just this year alone 4 churches. So they know kind of what that process is, why or why not you should make that choice, and what they offered us was indispensable for us. My hope in making the transition away from RiverTree is that it would take pressure off of the steering team, who had grown more and more concerned that they couldn't take care of my family. They had watched your ability as a church dwindle to do that. And so actually at this meeting on the 15th, there was probably greater freedom for us to talk openly about how long RiverTree would be viable, because now they knew they wouldn't have to take care of me and mine for that much longer. Now, if you want to know more about the decision-making process that happened on the 15th, we're going to be around afterward, and we'll open it up to you for that. But this is sort of what's gone on. You read letters about this, so now we need to pivot. What we want to do over the next 3 weeks is help our church and you personally end this chapter well. And to do that, we're actually going to be tapping into some of the essential, indispensable wisdom that our classes passed on to us on the 15th. So actually, a lot of what I say to you in the next 3 weeks is my way of telling you what they told us on the 15th. So today, we need to start here. Up there on the screen is the predictable life cycle of every human being you know, including you. You will pass in the course of your lifetime from birth to death. And maybe at some point in middle-aged, when you're plateaued or you're in your 50s or your 60s and you've started to see physical decline, maybe you pay more attention to your diet and exercise, and maybe you can lengthen that arc out a little further to the right. But in the end, all of us will travel down there to what we call death, the end of human life. Now, what you may not know is every church you know is going to travel that same arc. The oldest churches in America are only 300, 400 years old, and in most cases have had to go through birth to death and then back around again. Churches just don't last. All those suburban churches right now that you know of that are big and have lots of money and big buildings and lots of staff, talk to them in 40 years. Talk to them in 50 years. And what you'll find is that most churches at some point have to face the fact that they are plateaued and declining, and they either have to reverse this cycle, or what will eventually happen is they end over on the bottom right. And even if they delay what's going on in being plateaued or in decline, at some point, most churches end in their current form, in their current context. It's just the way it is. But we as Christian people we don't merely acknowledge the certainty of death. One of the key Christian hopes that defines what we believe is resurrection. And resurrection changes the way you understand that universal human experience of death. A couple of Easters ago, we actually put these verses of St. Paul in 1 Thessalonians 4 right front and center in what we talked about on Easter Sunday. It reads, "But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about those who have died, so that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will include with him everyone else who has died." See, from a Christian vantage point, that arc that I just showed you needs to be reshaped into a circle. For the Christian person, we understand that death is never just death. What will happen as you and I physically get closer and closer to our dying day is that we are also inching closer and closer to our resurrection or new birth. That is also true for churches. As Jack said when he prayed at the start of the service, one single entity or one single expression of God's people called a church can be moving toward death, but what you are promised is that after death there is always a new season, there is always a new chapter, there is always new life, there is always resurrection. In fact, in your life spiritually, you're only going to do this circle once physically. In your life spiritually, personally, emotionally, you're going to go through this cycle several times. You're going to go through a season in your life where you are growing and maturing, things are expanding, things are fruitful, and then in the next season of your life, that a passage from Ecclesiastes 3 reads that was read for you at the start of the service, you're going to go through a season where it seems like everything's shrinking, where instead of gaining things, you have to let go of things. Who you were in the past is no longer who you will be in the future, and you have to let it go. And some of you have already been in your lifetime through maybe one or two of these cycles. You as a human being, as you grow, are going to be defined by being birthed and maturing and then dying to who you were, so that then you can be rebirthed into what's next. Death and resurrection define how you will grow, not just how your human life ends. So it's vital for you to understand that a core Christian principle at all times in operation in your life is that you have to travel through death in order to experience resurrection. And there is no two ways about that. You have to go through death in order for resurrection to happen. So let's talk for a minute about death, or the end. Not just for the context or the setting of our church, but what you will experience once physically in your life and numerous times spiritually or emotionally or personally in your life. What does it look like to travel through a season of death? Well, the first one is obvious, and I'm sure at some point, maybe it was when you lost a loved one, someone gave you counsel about number one up on the screen. One of the most healthy things you can do as you move your way through a season of death is you have to allow yourself to grieve. You're not wrong, or you're not making a mistake, or you're not being weak if you feel sad, if you feel loss, if you feel angry at the death you're experiencing. This is all natural and normal. It is a process that will not be permanent. You know the only way you make grief permanent? By not going through the process. By not allowing yourself to do that. So, as you wrestle with and work through the end of our church in its current setting and form, you may at least initially have felt some of those things. And there will be more to come. You may feel a deeper sense of loss or mourning or loneliness. That's all natural. Do this for me. You're a gracious group of people. Now more than ever, you need to show each other that kind of grace and compassion. Don't judge somebody because they're having a hard time or maybe even a little angry at how things have transpired. It's vital that you cut each other the slack to grieve well. And perhaps number two to you is something you've experienced along the way when you lost a beloved friend or a parent or a grandparent. When you go through that death and rebirth, death, resurrection cycle, what you realize is that there comes a point, especially physically for human beings, where death is a kindness. It is inevitable, and it is a kindness. You ever been there? One of the things I get to do as a pastor is travel with people as they lose loved ones or as they themselves approach their physical death. And invariably, sometimes what happens is you have a well-meaning family member who says, yeah, but we need to try this experimental treatment. Or, you just need to try harder and be more positive because you're going to turn that corner, Dad, and the cancer isn't going to win. And sometimes I have to pull that person aside and say, hey, I get it that you're struggling. I get it that you don't want to lose Dad with you physically here on earth. But you fighting so hard for your dad to stay alive, in the end, is an unkindness to the rest of your family, and certainly to him, because you're just prolonging his suffering. One of the things that classes told us at that meeting on the 15th of July is that if we as the steering team felt like now or in the near future RiverTree was going to close in its current form, We needed to do it while it was a kindness to you guys. We didn't want it to go so long that more and more people left, that you were it was getting harder and harder to pay your bills, if not impossible, and you watched maybe how that would affect me or your next pastor, and they said to us, be keenly aware of number 2. Make sure you have enough love and assets and grace toward one another that when it is you decide it needs to be done, you have that left to give each other and to give away to others. Do it soon enough. Now, the last thing you need to know about going through a season of death, whether it's someone's physical death or you're going through a season of emotional or spiritual death, or even now for our church as it ends in its current form, you will, if you pay attention, you will find that God will seem more real and closer to you right now than maybe other times in your life. And that's not God changing, that's you changing. God's always ready and available to be near to us and intimate with us. But a lot of times we're too busy, or we take it for granted. And then you hit a season like this in the life of our church, or when a loved one is sick and dying, and all of a sudden you need him more. And your openness increases, and therefore your sense of him grows. Let me read to you a very famous verse that maybe you never understood this way from the most famous psalm in the Old Testament. This is verse 4 of Psalm 23, which reads, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you, God, are with me. Your shepherd's rod and staff comfort me." See, the wisdom of that great psalm that we all love is that God is there for you even in the darkest of times. And oftentimes you're more aware of it than any other time in your life. See if this isn't true for you, because it's already been true for me. Some of the conversations I've had with you, people who are part of the RiverTree family over the last 2 weeks, have seemed sweeter and more significant than conversations I've had before that. You know why? Because we're paying attention more. And we're open to each other more. We're not taking each other for granted because of the season we're in. God is not absent in a time of closure or end or decline or death. God actually is more available and accessible to you now than ever before. And that has to do with your receptivity to him. Please do not think of this as God being absent. God is here and real and traveling with us through this. So as a human being, physically once, spiritually more than once, you're going to have to travel through a season of decline or loss or death. And this is what it will look like for you, just like this is what it looks like for us as a church to enter this season. But you travel through this in order to get to the other side, in order to get to new life, new birth, what the Bible calls resurrection. And the only way to get there is to go through the dying process. You can't have resurrection without death. That seems self-explanatory. How many times have you thought that before, however? So here's the first thing you need to know about new birth. It's not about you, and it's not about me. It's not about you choosing to allow God to give you a next chapter or a new season. It's not about you choosing for God to give you life after death. It is not about you choosing new life after a season of loss or decline. That does factor in, but most fundamentally, that is not the point. The reason there is resurrection is because there's God, not you. This is how one of the great Christian thinkers of the 20th century named J.I. Packer writes it. And listen to where the emphasis is in why there is resurrection or new life. He says, I quote, "Optimism is a wish without warrant. Christian hope is a certainty, guaranteed by God himself. Optimism reflects ignorance as to whether good things will ever actually come. Christian hope expresses knowledge that every day of his or her life and every moment beyond it, the believer can say with truth, on the basis of God's own commitment, that the best is yet to come. Here's why I'm not worried about what's going to come next for my family and for me not knowing what I'm going to do to help pay the bills or be involved in ministry. Here's why I'm not worried about you and what's next. Because God himself is committed to resurrection. And he's not going to let you wander off or wander astray without nagging you or nipping at your heels about the offer of new life, of a new season, of something that comes next. This is why when you, as a believer who have faith in Jesus, die, your resurrection is assured. It's not because you're a good person. It's not because you've done enough to warrant resurrection. It's because God is God, and he is the God of life, and it's what he's going to do for you. It may not feel that way to some of you today, but this is what's coming for you after RiverTree. God guarantees you new life, a new chapter, a resurrection season to come. Now, number 2 is interesting, and again, it's kind of self-evident, but a lot of times we don't think about it. You don't know what's next till it comes. You don't know what resurrection is like until you experience it. My dad has been an elder in his church now for 30 plus years. They don't have, all you guys on the steering team can be thankful, you don't serve in his church. Once you're on, you stay on. That poor man has been on for 3 decades plus. He met one time with a dear friend of his who was in his 50s and dying of terminal cancer. And this very faithful man, this friend of my dad's named Craig, said to my dad, "I'm scared." This guy, Craig's been a Christian his whole life, a good man, has a rich, rewarding relationship with God. And yet there on his dying bed in the hospital, he says to my dad, "Ray, I'm scared." And my dad, in his wisdom that his son does not possess, looked at Craig and said, "Why wouldn't you be? You've never done this before. You're only going to do this once in your life. Everyone is scared of this. You're the same way, and so am I. I am going through a season myself right now where I am no longer, for the first time in my life, going to be going from one pastorate to another. I have been a pastor in some form or fashion for 27 years. Not anymore. Now, maybe someday, but not when I first get there. And it scares me sometimes, because I don't know what's coming around the corner. I don't know what that new birth or new chapter looks like. But I'm okay with that, because I won't experience it until God gives it to me. It's okay. I would say the same thing to you. Maybe you're grappling with, boy, I don't know how I'm going to stay connected with the people here that I care about. I don't know if I'm going to find another church family to call home that I appreciate as much as I do this one. I don't know if I'm going to find, I was going to say, I don't know if I'm going to find another pastor I like as much as this one, but I won't say that, right? But you get my point. Right now, those are your concerns, and they're valid concerns, but here's how resurrection works. You won't know what it looks like until you experience it, until it shows up. And that will be exactly like my dad's friend Craig on his dying bed. God is going to be faithful to give it to you. You need to be open to it when it comes, and when you get it, when it shows up, you'll understand. Now, the good news is, in resurrection, you keep who you are, or at least the best parts of who you are, so it's not like that's going away. In your physical death, right, when someday you pass away and you go on into the next life, the new life that God guarantees, it's not like you're going to be somebody else. all those accumulated experiences, all the ways you've grown, all those memories that you have of the sweetest times of your earthly life, you keep those. You just become a better you. You become a you that looks more like Jesus. That's what resurrection is. Well, that's kind of how it works in life as we go through seasons of growth and then decline, growth and then decline. We go through a season of growth, then death, then new birth spiritually. This is how it works too. This is why I said to you earlier that what I would ask you to pray for me is that everything I have accumulated up to now, not the scars and not the baggage, but the experience and the expertise that I have in this particular field, I want to find a way in my next chapter, my resurrection chapter, to use it. I want to keep the best parts of me in what comes next. I don't know what that looks like yet, but that's okay. You're the same way. For some of you, you have as much invested in RiverTree as I do. For some of you, it's longer. So it's 10 years. It's 15 years of growing and learning and changing. Think of all the things we've learned together and how we've changed together. Yeah, that shouldn't stop with our last Sunday service on the 6th of August. Those are the things, the accumulated experience and growth and development that you will carry with you into your next chapter, whatever it is that's next. And don't let it go. Whatever is coming next is directly tied to who you've already been. You just get to be better. And that's the offer that you have too. You might not remember, but a few weeks ago, we spent 2 weeks talking about the cross. Because somebody asked me in our summer question and answer series, how is it exactly that the death of Jesus on a cross saves us? So we spent 2 weeks talking about that. And you might recall that one of the things I said to you in the second week of that 2-week set is that in your New Testament, one of the chief ways it presents the death of Jesus is that it is life winning over death. That all human beings eventually die. That is inevitable. And so the cross is Jesus dying, experiencing what you and I will inevitably experience too, and then God saying, death will not get the last say. The old Latin expression for this view of the cross is Christus Victor, Christ the victor. Christ the victor over death, who gives us then new life or resurrection. I didn't know that when I taught you that 3 weeks ago, it would be so relevant for us now. But today and every week that we have remaining, as we meet on Sunday morning, we're going to observe communion together as this shared, intimate, biblical way of celebrating our community and the God who loves us. And today what we want to put into focus as we celebrate communion together is just that promise, that through death, resurrection comes. That Jesus in his death conquered the final, greatest enemy of the human race to give us new life. These are Paul's words from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where he expresses that idea. For since death came through a human being, the resurrection of the dead has also come through a human being too. For as all die in Adam, so all will be made alive in Christ. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. As you reflect not just on that hope for your own life, this is also the hope that we have. As RiverTree in its current form comes to a terminus point, you are no less guaranteed new life because Jesus has been victorious over death.